All right, let's go ahead and begin our discussion. Like I said before, we're moving into the discussions of bivariate data, the bivariate portion of our Unit 4. And bivariate data, what it basically is, it's comparing two quantitative data sets and how they are related based off of whether they have a positive relationship or a negative relationship or no relationship whatsoever. And in these terms, we don't necessarily always call them relationships. We sometimes call them correlations or associations, but they all mean how do they relate to each other. Kind of like when you're in social studies and you're talking about cause and effect. So you say, okay, here's the causes that had an effect on this. Like maybe these situations caused an effect of war or caused an effect of one culture to leave their homeland and find, sanctuary somewhere else. So these are all kind of related, but in this sense, we're talking about how two quantitative and qualitative items are related to each other, how they have an effect on each other. Okay, so what we're learning for today is the idea of scatter plots. So scatter plots are very similar to linear relationships, but as you notice, are they forming straight lines here? No, they're not. They're not forming straight lines because they are showing linear relationships in the sense that they're going in a somewhat straight path, but they have values that are ranging inside and outside of that linear pathway. But they are still following linear relationships in the sense that they're kind of going straight, either in a positive correlation or a negative correlation, and that they are showing whether they have clusterings of items, meaning that some items are following one pattern and then the rest of it's following another pattern, or they might have outliers. You guys remember what an outlier is, right? Who can tell me what an outlier is? If I say there's an outlier in our data set. What do you think, Jeffrey?
Dot or something that is not in the line.
Okay, a dot that might not be in the line, or in a situation, let's say, everybody in here received an A on the quiz except for one student who received a C. That one student would be an outlier. The same can go in the reverse. Maybe every single person in a class failed an exam except one person who got like a 90 on the exam. That person would be an outlier. Outliers don't necessarily have to mean that they've done something bad. It could be something that's good. It just, what it means is it's information that's very different. It stands out from the rest of the majority data points. Okay, that's what an outlier would be. All right, so let's go ahead and just talk about some really important pieces of information here. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the types of variable association. So variables meaning how does X compare to Y, or how does your X relate to your Y. And we have three kinds of variable associations. The first variable association is our positive association. And what positive association means is that as your X is increasing, so is your Y. So as your X information goes up, your Y information goes up. It also has the reverse. As your X information goes down, the Y information goes down. Okay? When X increases, Y increases. When X decreases, Y decreases. Those are called positive relations. And if you're looking at it, it kind of looks almost like it's going in a positive slope. Okay? Very similar to what we would call positive slopes. Positive relationships are graphed in the same position. Okay, then we've got negative associations. With negative associations or correlations or relationships, as your X is going up, your Y is going down. So what this means is that your variables have opposite effects on each other. One increases, the other has to decrease. So as X decreases, Y would increase. They have opposite effects. And again, looks very similar to what we would have said was a negative slope. If this happened to be something that was a straight line, we would indicate that the slope was negative. And it's important to understand that there technically is a line that exists here. There is a line. It's called a line of best fit. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on this week. Okay, then you have no association. No association means that it doesn't matter whether X increases or decreases, Y is not affected by it whatsoever. So it's very much thrown about, okay? There is nothing, there's no like pattern that you can follow, no pattern whatsoever. In fact, I'm going to write that down. No pattern or trend. Okay, you cannot follow the relationship whatsoever because they are not relatable. They have no relation to each other. Okay, so that's our variable associations. Then we have linear associations, which basically just means, based off of what you're seeing, does it look like it's forming a lined path or a curved path? Linear means that it would be a lined path. Non-linear means that there's some curves to it, whether it might be a single curve or multiple curves that's happening. So here's a couple of examples of some linear and non-linear associations. So again, the linear, it looks almost like it's following a straight pathway. This one being a positive linear. This one would be a negative linear relationship. And then you've got some non-linear relationships here. This one being positive, but it kind of curves a little bit, so it's non-linear, a positive non-linear relationship versus a negative non-linear curve. Okay? And then down towards the bottom, I've got some information about clustering and outliers that we already just discussed. Again, a clustering is just a group of points that follow the same pattern. So in this first graph that I have here, we actually have 3 clusters. We have 3 separate clusters that are being displayed. So cluster number 1 is located right here. They're all following almost a very back-to-back pattern. Cluster number 2 is also showing a positive relationship, but it's a lot steeper. And then cluster number 3 still continues to follow a positive relationship, but it's not quite as steep. Okay, so they are following a similar pattern. A lot of people think clustering means that they're all just like gathered around to each other, but that's not necessarily true. A clustering means that they're just following a pattern. Okay, so you can have a single scatter plot being considered one large cluster. Okay, and then your outliers, like we said before, your outliers are the pieces of information that just stand way out from the rest of the data points. So in this situation, we happen to have 2 outliers. They are completely offset from the rest of the pattern. Okay? All right, go ahead and flip it on over to the back. So now we're going to talk about some examples of positive and negative and no correlations or no associations whatsoever. Some just basic examples of real-world situations that follow these kinds of trends. So one of the most common positive correlation trends that I can tell you about is how you spend your time studying. Versus the test scores that you might receive. Okay, the amount of time that you spend studying for a test does have a positive effect on the amount of time that you, or the amount of scoring that you receive, or the percentage that you receive on your test. Meaning, if you spend low times, you might get a low score. The more time you spend studying, the higher your score might be. Now, of course, we do have those rare instances where people study and they don't do well. Or people who don't study and they do just fine. Again, we would call those the outliers of the group, because it's not very common. All right, another example. We can talk about a child's age and versus their weight. A child's age versus their weight. Okay? When you're at a very young age, your weight is a little bit lower. And as you get older, you're growing, your weight gets bigger. Right? So as you get older, as a little kid, starting from a baby all the way up to, your teens, as you're aging, you're growing, which naturally means that your weight is increasing as well. So when you're at a really young age, which is a low age, you have a lower weight. And when you're at an older age, you have a higher weight. Okay? Practice versus your skill. Okay, the more you practice at something, the better you become at it. The less you practice, less likely you are to get better at it. Okay, I don't think I need to keep writing that, right? Mm-hmm. But these are things that have positive correlations, positive associations with each other. As one increases, the other should increase as well. Now, some negative correlations. Now, a lot of people think, oh, negative correlation, it must be something bad. It doesn't mean that it's something bad, okay? It could be anything. So, drinking water versus how much is left in the bottle. Okay, when you don't drink a lot, you have a lot in your bottle. The more that you drink, the less that you have in your bottle. Those are called negative effects. Okay, as one is small, the other is large. So drink water versus the amount in the bottle. Okay, basically meaning the more you drink, the less water in the bottle. Okay, here's a really good, yeah.
So like a negative correlation to like your energy versus your running?
Your energy versus your running.
The more you run, the less energy.
Yeah, you get to tire out, yeah, things like that. The more you run, the less energy you're going to have at the end. Okay, here's something that's very, very common, especially right around now with cold and flu and COVID season. Washing your hands and the amount of time that you're sick. Okay, washing hands versus the sick time. The more often that you wash your hands through the day, the less likely you are to get sick. Okay? The more you wash, the less you are sick. Okay? Food versus hunger. The more you eat, the less hungry you are. Okay? So these are all considered to be our negative associations or negative correlations. Okay? The more you eat, the less hungry you are. And then you've got things like no associations. They have no relationship to each other whatsoever. So like how long your arm is and how well you do on a test, on your math test. The length of your arm has no effect on how well you're going to do on your math test. Okay? Those have no association whatsoever. So arm length versus math score.
What if the math test is like you have to skill something specific out, like your arm is...
We're talking about your basic run-of-the-mill, take your math test equations kind of thing, okay? Not something that you're gearing specifically towards the ability to be able to hold something. Okay? The amount of hair you have versus your siblings. How much hair you have does not determine how many siblings you will have. They have no relationship. So these are things that are just far stretched from each other. They don't relate. They aren't going to have an effect or an impact on each other. Okay? When you're ready, go on ahead. switch it on over to the next page.
Like what grade you're in compared to how many people are in a class with that?
The grade that you're in compared to the amount of people in your class, really that does not have a correlation because class sizes are very different. Like you are all in 7th grade and you guys are a class size of 28, and then I have another class size that has 35 and another class size that has 22, and your age, your grade level has no effect on the class size whatsoever. So no correlation. So my daughter is in a class of 26 in hers, but then her best friend has a class of 19, and they're in 4th grade. Yeah. So high school tends to have, large classes compared to elementary, but again, it's not that much of an effect. Now, when you get to college, that's different. Your college time does have an effect on class size because as you start your first few years of college, your class sizes are going to be huge. We're talking 200 plus people. Well, you have a bunch of TAs and stuff, but you've got several people in that class section, so it's usually a large auditorium that they're all in. But as you get into your upper grade levels of college, like you get into your class sizes get smaller because then you're starting to gear it more towards the specific kind of degree that you're wanting to get. So like everybody has to take a general math class, a general science, a general social studies, general English class as their freshman year. But as you are getting into your junior and senior years of college, you're now saying, I am taking this specific psychology class because I'm going to become a counselor, that kind of thing. All right, so let's take a look at this last page, front and back. This is your assignment for today, and we're going to go over it tomorrow at the beginning of class. You are able to work with the people at your table, but basically you're answering each of these questions and identifying what they represent. So the back too, the front and the back. So you're looking at the graph. Some of them you might be actually graphing information. So make sure you understand where you are graphing certain points and then answering what they represent. So what does this graph represent? Basically, what kind of correlation is it? Is it a positive or a negative? Not that part. What does it represent? This one represents the gas mileage of a car compared to the pricing of a car. So it's comparing prices and gases, or gas mileage and price of the car. Is there a relationship between the price and the gas mileage? So you're going to state what the relationship would be. Do you think the relationship is linear or non-linear? Then they're giving you a specific point. So they're telling you the point 2423. What does that specific point represent based off of your X and Y labelings? Do you think that there are any outliers in the graph? And then you're going to complete the phrase. There is a blank association because as X increases, Y, what? Y increases, Y decreases, Y has no effect. You're going to be answering those questions. So you're doing that for the front and the back. You're going to answer all of these questions, okay? And then we're going to go over it tomorrow.